New Testament, and the beginning of a sermon attributed to Jesus found in the gospel that we call Matthew. They both include passages that have been become popular, particularly among the progressive Christians in the past 50 years or so. Just like us, right? Progressive Christians in the past 50 years or so, right? Our first reading from Micah included an answer from God to the question, what does God require of you? That answer that was given there must have been quite a shock for those people that heard it or read it for the very first time. They would have probably expecting something more like, what does God require of you? Follow the law in the Torah and the rules that the priests in the temple give you. Otherwise, God may get you. The Sermon of the Mount begins with what would have been called the Beatitudes. The word translated as blessed. It begins each line of that list of things. The words must have been quite a shock to those who first heard them or read them as well. They too were used to being told what God expected of them. Preached to about a God that would punish those that were not following the rules and bless those who did what pleased God. They certainly didn't think that they were probably included initially in that list of people, but here they were. Those people mentioned by Jesus in that sermon, the poor, those who thirsted, the meek, and so on and so on. And that was them. It was describing them. Jesus was telling them they were blessed. Blessed in the kingdom of heaven, along with the mourning and the meek and the kind and the innocent reconcilers. I believe that these passages are not about ancient laws or rules being rewritten, or even addressing the behavior of a particular code or set of guidelines that has been given by some religious authority, or even replacing those with some new laws or rules to follow. Rather, these things that are being spoken of, both by that ancient prophet called Micah and Jesus here in this sermon that he's giving to the crowds that have now gathered around him, they are about attitudes and actions that result in blessing. I'm going to say that again. I believe these texts are really about actions and attitudes that result in blessing. Blessing not just for the individual who adopts them, but for humanity when they are embraced and they are practiced. And they are particularly appropriate for a church, a group of people that have come together to try to be faithful followers of Jesus' way especially a church that is trying to figure out, and by church I mean the people, trying to figure out more fully who they are being called to be and how God is calling them to be. Anybody here this morning know a church sort of like that? Let's just say Holy Redeemer, okay? This sermon and these ancient prophecies isn't just about those people that existed long ago. And it's not about a set list of rules that one must follow in order to try to please God. These attitudes, these actions are what God says will bless us and bless those that we live among. What makes us Holy Redeemer is our attitude we have about God and one another and those we live among. And when we put those attitudes into action, trying to live them on a daily basis, then we will be blessed. These are instructions not given by me, not given by our moderator, Reverend Cecilia Eggleston in England, not given by any other sort of church authority, but they are instructions, a how to be blessed and be a blessing. These words given by God thousands of years ago through Micah and the words of Jesus' sermon are just as true for us today when we accept them as instructions for blessing. If we want to be blessed and provide a blessing, then each of us is called to do justice and to be kind and be humble enough to let God and the way of Jesus guide us in our living. If we want our church, Holy Redeemer, to be blessed, we ought to make more room for the Spirit in our lives. We also ought to realize that these be attitudes ought to be our attitudes. We are being called to be the meek that is needed right here, right now, where we live. To be the comforting for those who mourn. To be the seekers of right ways for our community. To be merciful. To be sincere. To be peacemakers, even if it means being persecuted because of it. Because these are, according to Jesus, the ideal characteristics of a follower of his way, his church, the kingdom that he came to reveal. So the question for us today is this. Okay, just like in the gospel reading, there's not just one question. I'm warning you ahead of time. There are a whole variety of questions coming up here. You choose one, pick one, any one, okay, that you think particularly applies to you. How can we, as a church, have more of an attitude and put more into action justice? How can we as a church, have more of an attitude and put into action kindness? How can we, and as a church, and I, be more humble in my walk with God? How can we increase the Spirit? How can you and I be better comforters? How can we be more merciful? How can we maintain our innocence? How can we be peacemakers? And how can we not be afraid to be persecuted for Christ's sake? I told you there's a lot of questions. But this is what Jesus was talking about when he went up and sat on that rock. This is what Micah, one of the minor but most powerful prophets in ancient Israel, was talking about when he interpreted what God was saying to the people through him. These attitudes, these actions that we decide to live rather than just read or create a new rule for following. These are what I believe is calling us to have a more full blessing as a church, as individuals, rather than some set of religious guidelines or doctrine. The answer to these questions is what will make us blessed and a blessing. And so, if you want to know how to get a blessing, this morning I believe God is telling us to adopt these attitudes, these actions. And I encourage each one of us to at least consider putting into practice in a real, substantial way one of the answers you made to one of those questions sometime this week. And then come back. See what I'm doing there, just like Jesus sent you out, as disciples. I'm sending you out as the prophets, the doers of Jesus' way. And when you come back next week, I want to hear which of these attitudes you adopted and how you were blessed by it. Let's have the courage to make it so. Amen.